Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Casual Criminalist. I, as always, am your host Simon. Welcome. What we do here, one of my writers, in this case Arnaldo, thanks Arnaldo, has written me a script, The Doodler, the serial killer who terrorized San Francisco's gay community. Brilliant, uplifting episode we've got for you today. Here at the True Crime Podcast, Casual Criminalist. Oh no. The format of the show, I've never read this before. We're going to explore it together, dear listener. So let us jump in. If you string together the words San Francisco, unsolved murders, and cold case, your mind might naturally race towards a name etched for eternity into the hall of infamy of serial killers, the Zodiac. Yes, indeed. Made a video about the Zodiac. Check it out. With his confirmed kill count of 5 victims, taunting letters to the police, and a long list of potential suspects, the astrologically inclined murderer held a well-deserved place in the nightmares of the inhabitants of Frisco. Is that what people in San Francisco call San Francisco? I thought they just called it SF. Is that because, right? San Fran. But only a few years after this elusive demon was in activity, the Bay Area would be targeted by another mysterious serial killer, equally ruthless and even more lethal, with a confirmed total of 6 deaths. And yet this story is not as pervasive and commemorated by true crime enthusiasts. Well, we're fixing that today, aren't we, everybody? And also, with a cool serial killer name like the Doodler? I mean, this guy's, it's got media attention all over it. Why is no one covered? Why is this less covered than the Zodiac? In today's episode, we'll recount the sinister and frustrating tale of the waste of oxygen known to San Francisco press and the SFPD, the San Francisco Police Department, as the Doodler. A tale of frustration. From 1974 to 1975, the Doodler preyed upon the thriving gay community in San Francisco, a city considered a safe haven for those who are lifestyle still considered depraved, debauched, and borderline criminal in many parts of the US. Yeah, it's kind of wild. That's only 10 years before I was born. Oh, God. It's nice that society moves forward with this stuff, isn't it? For the most part. Not that, I mean, for the most part moves forward, not for the most part it's nice. Just before we get back into today's episode, let me talk about something that is an absolute game changer in the underwear world, and that is sheath underwear. I know what you're thinking. Underwear. It's been around for a long time, Simon. How's sheath going to be any different from me? Well, let me ask. Ever find the boxer shorts too loose? Ever feel like briefs too tight? Where sheath, they fix all of that. I'm wearing a pair of sheath right now. I got a nice clean pair of sheath right here. I wear these every day. They're particularly fantastic if you're going to the gym, by the way, and just keep everything nicely in the right places. Also comfortable to sleep in, which is also nice. They have this multi-pocket system for all of your different man pieces. So your man pieces go in this dual pouch system, which keeps everything separated, cool, comfortable in the summer. It's just perfect. Also, if you're not feeling that, you could just wear them like regular underwear as well. Look, I was skeptical about this at first. Sheath sent me some. I tried them. I like them. Now it's basically all I wear. My suggestion to you, buy one pair, see if you like it, you probably will, and then you'll order more. Plus, they've got sheath made out of new materials like bamboo and mesh for extra cooling comfort, because as I'm recording this, it's August, it's pretty hot outside. Plus, they're the official sponsors of the UFC, so you know that they're legit, so head over to sheathunderwear.com, grab the most comfortable underwear you'll ever wear, and use the promo code CRIMINALIST to get 20% off your order. That's sheathunderwear.com, promo code CRIMINALIST for 20% off. Thank you to them for sponsoring, and now back to today's episode. This killer murdered 6 homosexual men, but may have killed up to 14 victims. Further, 3 of his would-be targets narrowly escaped death at his hands, and one of them would recount a peculiar habit of his. As the killer initiated a conversation with his would-be victim, he was sketching some little animals on a diner's napkin. The press picked up on this detail and unsurprisingly exaggerated it, claiming that the killer would seduce gay men by doodling their portrait or caricature before dragging them to an isolated location and brutally slaying them. How about press? We just call him the Brutal Slayer. Or like the dickhead brutal slayer, as I always say, rather than like the Doodler, which sounds way too cool for someone who is just out murdering. The Doodler murders are considered a cold case by the SFPD, and you would be forgiven for thinking that, as is often the case, police incompetence allowed for yet another serial killer to get away scot-free. However, as we will discover, one of San Francisco's top cops did do his homework, identifying and questioning a very, very likely suspect. Oh, okay. If that's as far as it went, though, how likely can they be? They didn't even attempt to prosecute. But we will also discover that this is a case left to marinate for too long in the bitter juices of frustration. A case in which prejudice against the gay community played a large part in preventing one key witness from providing a potentially incriminating testimony. Now, before we get into the thick of the subject, allow me to introduce the backdrop, the context in which this tragedy unfolded. Wonderland, Frisco. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, it wasn't easy to come out of the closet in the US or anywhere else in the world for that matter. Up until 1973, the American Psychiatric Association Board of Trustees still classified homosexuality as a disorder. One city in California, however, offered a safe haven for those members of the LGBTQ+ community who would only desire to claim the right to live free of prejudice, isolation, and, too often, violence. This was San Francisco, of course, a place where, in the words of journalist Elon Green, another dude called Elon? There's more than one dude called Elon? LGBT people could be treated with some legitimacy and respect, where a flourishing and diverse nightlife provided social and sexual opportunities for LGBT people of all ages and demographics. This was the first American city to elect an openly gay man, Harvey Milk, into public office. Made a video about Harvey Milk on a channel I used to do called Biographics. Fascinating guy. And the first to appoint an openly gay investigator in the district attorney's office, Ron Huberman. In Huberman's words, a clarion call went out in the underground network that San Francisco was the place to be. And within San Francisco, in the mid-1970s, young gay men favored the Castro district with its thriving nightclub, bars, and bathhouses. Quoting again from Elon Green, it was a pre-AIDS wonderland. Well, not so fast. Members of the LGBT community still had to contend with prejudice, discrimination, and even outbursts of violence, as gay bashing was a popular pastime among homophobic creeps. Moreover, despite the overall progressive stance of San Francisco institutions, the local police department had little sympathy for their fellow citizens with a very different lifestyle. The SFPD even had a policy against hiring LGBT officers. Its director of personnel, George Imel, even went so far as stating, "I guess you could say they, homosexuals, are of bad moral character. If he is a covert homosexual, there is no question we would not hire him." Wow, that would be very, very illegal today. And rightly so. I'm generally of the opinion, who gives a... I've mentioned this before. It's how does this, people who, the gay bashing or people who are just against gay marriage and stuff, it's how does this bother you? I guess there's the people who are super religious and they're I don't like it because I'm religious and Jesus says that it's not okay. It's but really? Why do you care so much? Just let it go. It's okay. Just let it go. No one's getting hurt. No one's getting hurt. It's not a gay person's going to come along and make you gay. And then I've got news for you. If that happens to you, it's because you're gay. What the fuck? Captain William O'Connor, Director of Public Relations, openly described gays as emotionally unstable. The SFPD demonstrated this animosity by staging frequent raids of gay-friendly establishments, inflicting harassment and beatings on its patrons. An LGBT publication, The Advocate, reported the specific case of two particularly homophobic officers, Cornelius Lucy and William Gay. Oh, the irony, dude. Your surname's Gay and you're super homophobic. There's probably something there, isn't there? Officer Gay would drive slowly through the Golden Gate Park in a pickup truck and stop near a strolling male. He would then stretch out and show a bulging basket in his tight Levi's. If the strolling male made an approach, Officer Gay would promptly arrest him, which is doubly infuriating as it is entrapment, and entrapment for something that's not even a crime. Even worse, the Lucy and Gay duo once seized gay motorist Lawrence Candler after a minor traffic violation and then battered him so severely that he suffered brain damage. What the f***? It's no wonder then if the LGBT citizens of Frisco did not trust the police and failed to report the crimes they suffered, from muggings to sexual assault. As a consequence, violent crime against the community steadily increased through the 1970s. In 1974, 129 LGBT people were murdered in San Francisco. In 1 year, the number grew to 131 in 1975. I don't know what the murder rate in San Francisco is for a normal person, just get how that compares, but that seems really high. I hope I'm not boring you with this long setup. No, not at all. It's quite fascinating, but believe me, it is relevant. When the killer, later known as the Doodler, started reaping his victims, many residents of the Castro district felt the police were generally indifferent to the menace. To quote again from the DA's office, investigator Ron Huberman, "If gay men were assaulted for being gay or robbed, the cops thought gay men had it coming to them, much as they thought women had it coming to them when sexual assaults happened to them." Bro. It's like, yeah, well, she shouldn't have worn such a short skirt. She was asking to be sexually assaulted. Am I right? It's insane. It's insane. The example that I continually got from cops is, I can't believe you would just walk into a bar and take somebody home. But as we shall see later, not everybody at the department was indifferent or openly hostile to the homosexual community. Business owners in the Castro district and officials such as Huberman and Harvey Milk would pressure police forces into taking more steps to protect LGBT citizens. In the second half of the 1970s, the SFPD became one of the first forces to organize squads of plainclothes officers tasked with arresting gay and lesbian bashers. Death by the water. All right, we've laid out the mural of what it was like to be young and gay in San Francisco and the Castro district, a composite landscape of lights and shadows. It's now time to look at the darker corners of this masterpiece. At 1:57 a.m. on January the 27th, 1974, police dispatch received an anonymous call. A corpse was lying on San Francisco's Ocean Beach as the waves were gently lapping on the sand, darkened by a pool of blood. The body belonged to a middle-aged man, initially identified as John Doe number 7. He was lying in a supine position. That's lying down. That's how you lie. Was fully dressed, carried little more than $20 in his pockets, and wore a Timex watch. The cause of death was clear from the start. 17 stab wounds, including defensive wounds on his left hand. 17 stab wounds inflicted clearly in a frenzy. The police quickly identified him as Gerald Earl Kavanaugh, born in Canada in 1923 and employed at a mattress factory. The local press captured very few other details about Kavanaugh. He was Catholic, and according to a note from the coroner, he never married, which was interpreted as a euphemism for him being gay. In fact, investigators speculated that he may have been a regular in the Castro district. According to one testimony, he may have been seen at a nightclub in the area that Saturday night. The case fell on the desk of detectives Ratia Guilford and Earl Sanders. Guilford in particular would be attached to the case for the years to come and make a stellar career at the SFPD, becoming the first African-American officer to head the homicide division. Here is a photo of Guilford, by the way, and I must say he looks every bit the part. A tough investigator from a badass cop show. It's like, yes, exactly. he's gonna find some out. That is a hell of a blazer as well, my dude. 5 months went by. Then on June the 25th, 1974, an anonymous woman found another body lying once again by the water. Although in this case it was not Ocean Beach, but the small Spreckles Lane in Golden Gate Park, located around a mile from where the previous victim had been found. The woman called out to a dog walker, who then alerted the police. The victim was quickly identified as 27-year-old Joseph Stevens, known to friends as Jay. Jay was something of a celebrity in the Castro district, being a popular female impersonator and comedian in the Castro district. It's not clear if Joseph/Jay identified as male or female in everyday life, but press articles to the present day always refer to Stevens as a he, so we'll go by this pronoun too. A native Texan, Jay had moved to San Francisco at least 7 years prior, attracting audiences with his lip-syncing and comedic routines. He had just achieved the peak of his notoriety that very spring by securing a headlining act at a club called Finocchio's, famous for its drag queen performances. This venue deserves a few words, by the way. It's named after the Italian word for fennel and should be pronounced to rhyme with Pinocchio. Yes, I got it right. Yes, I assumed it was a play on Pinocchio. I should point out that Finocchio is a derogatory slur for gay men in my native Italy, which leaves me to wonder if the founder was a fan of garden produce or simply homophobic. Well, he's probably not homophobic, seeing as it is a club popular with gay people. In any case, by the mid-1970s, Finocchio's catered to a largely mainstream crowd due to the tame nature of its entertainment. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought it was a more gay place, and it was shunned by the more edgy residents of Castro. Oh, okay. The LGBT publication, The Sentinel, even mocked it as being, quote, about as respectable as the First Methodist Church back home. Stevens' murder presented some similarities with the killing of Gerald Kavanaugh. The victim was a gay man, had been left to die in a body of water, and there were signs of a ferocious struggle. If you remember, Kavanaugh had been furiously stabbed a total of 17 times. Stevens, on the other hand, presented only 3 stab wounds, but as noted down by the coroner, quote, approximately 10 feet west of the deceased's feet was a large, disturbed area of brush with a pool of blood. There were drag marks from this point to where the deceased was found, indicating that an altercation had taken place. Yeah, no shit, there was an altercation. Someone got stabbed 3 times, my dude. Nonetheless, detectives Guilford and Sanders still had no elements to link the two cases and treated them as separate homicide investigations. The officers soon found out that Jay Stevens had been last seen alive the previous night as he was leaving the Cabaret Club in the North Beach neighborhood. According to one testimony, he had been seen, quote, chatting with and leaving with a tall, lanky black man. As Jay's car was found near the crime scene, investigators speculated that the victim had driven to Spreckles Lake willingly, presumably accompanied by the tall African-American man, and possibly to enjoy a sexual encounter in a secluded area of Golden Gate Park. There were no elements to indicate that the lanky guy was the murderer, but it was very likely that the attack had taken place during or immediately after their encounter. Well, it seems he would be, in my mind, suspect number one. While the murder of Gerald Kavanaugh had attracted little attention, this second killing was reported by LGBT paper The Sentinel, and in particular by one of its lead columnists and police sergeant Elliot Blackstone. Blackstone sought to reassure his readers by writing that, quote, the percentage of the total number of homicides that have gay overtones is very, very small. Now, Simon, I hope you don't mind if I go on a tangent here. No, go ahead, Arnaldo. You're very welcome to. That peculiar spelling, homicides. Oh, okay, so, yeah, it is spelt wrong, and Arnaldo put, like, a little sick in there, saying, like, homicides, like homicides. I thought it was just a spelling error, so I didn't state it during the quote, but let's see where Arnaldo goes, attracted my attention, as well as the fact that Blackstone was an SFPD sergeant writing for The Sentinel. Was that word a veiled slur indicating the murder of homosexuals? I found out that homicide was a frequent typo for homicide, with an I, the correct spelling, with San Francisco press in particular being a repeat offender, even when violence against the gay community was not involved. Moreover, I dug into Sergeant Blackstone's story and found that he would never direct slurs against his homosexual readers. You see, the man was something of a legend within the LGBT citizens of Frisco. Since the early 1960s, he had been a pioneer of community-based policing, championing several initiatives to promote dialogue with the gay and transgender communities. Well, in that case, it just sounds like he made a typo. As early as 1968, Sergeant Blackstone had co-founded the National Transsexual Counseling Unit, and he led church fundraisers to help transgender women pay for hormone therapy. Whoa, they had hormone therapy in like the 1960s? I had no idea. According to the Bay Area Reporter, his superiors did not appreciate such efforts with the Transsexual Counseling Unit. When raiding its premises in 1973, the SFPD, quote, attempted to frame Blackstone on drug charges with marijuana planted in his desk. Though he avoided criminal prosecution, he lost his position as a community relations officer and was assigned to a foot patrol in the Mission Castro until his retirement in 1975. Elliot Blackstone died on October 25, 2006, shortly after being honored by the SFPD chief, Heather Fong, at a commemoration ceremony. Quote, he planted the seed to ensure that San Francisco is welcoming and that all people are treated equal. Well, sounds like a bit of a legend, to be honest. Elliot was asked by the Bay Area Reporter as to why he, a straight man, had taken such an active role on behalf of LGBT people. His reply was, because it was the right thing to do. Legend. But back to the hot summer of 1974. The ink of Sergeant Blackstone's reassuring column had barely dried when a third body was found. It was the morning of July the 7th, 1974, when Ms. Tauber Weiss and her dog Moondance were taking a stroll at the intersection between Lincoln Way and Great Highway, the corner squeezed between Golden Gate Park to the east and Ocean Beach to the west. Tauber later declared how it was Moondance who actually found the body. Quote, the dog was running, and I followed him. I knew something was wrong. I saw a man laying there, and he wasn't moving. I knew he was dead. The body belonged to a man in his 30s. As noted by the coroner, had suffered 15 knife wounds, including 3 deep slashes to the throat. Quote, in a manner which seemed as though the assailant had attempted to decapitate the deceased. Alongside Detectives Guilford and Sanders, the crime scene was visited by Inspector Toshi, a veteran of the Zodiac case. According to the Sentinel, quote, Toshi described the murder as one of the most vicious stabbings he has ever seen. The coroner noted down some details which were immediately interpreted as evidence of the victim being homosexual. He carried a makeup tube in his pocket, and his unzipped trousers revealed a pair of orange bikini briefs. The identification of the victim soon followed. The deceased was Klaus Kreismann, a 31-year-old German citizen hailing from Bamberg, north of Nuremberg. Mr. Kreismann was married and had 2 children, although it's not clear where they were residing at the time. What is clear is that San Francisco was not the Kreismann's normal place of residence, as Klaus had been in the city for just 3 months living with some friends. Guilford and Sanders soon found that Klaus was last seen alive in a club in the Mission Castro area not far from the Golden Gate Park. Stomped into nothing. At this stage, Guilford and partners realized that they had a case of serial murder in their hands. Same victim profile, same modus operandi, same locations. In August 1974, the Sentinel reported extensively about the crimes, writing that, quoting again, Police are aware of the similarities between the murder of Mr. Christman and the stabbing of Gerald Kavanagh last January. There also appear to be similarities between the two stabbings and the murder of Jay Stevens. All apparently involve the victim meeting someone who suggested driving to a remote area as the beach or Golden Gate Park. All three were viciously stabbed front and back. All three were stripped of identification and property. Now, the investigators' theory was that the killer was ashamed of his own sexuality. He lured gay men to secluded locations around Golden Gate Park or Ocean Beach for a romantic encounter, after which his sense of guilt and shame erupted into a homicidal frenzy. Guilford and colleagues finally plunged into the nightlife of San Francisco, visiting nightclubs in the Castro Mission as well as Tenderloin districts, the latter known for its drag scene. It's now worth mentioning that the killer, later known as the Doodler, may not have been the only murderer stalking the gay community. Back in 1974, Detective Toshi of Zodiac fame had taken on the case of George Gilbert, whose body had been found in his Fox Plaza apartment on September the 29th. By day, Gilbert was an employee at Wells Fargo Bank. By night, according to Toshi, he was a leather freak, a slave who liked being gagged, tied down on all fours, and spanked to the point of orgasm. Okie dokie then. More prosaically, Gilbert liked to frequent the lively leather bars of the Folsom district, and on the night of the 28th, apparently somebody had sex with him, ripped his leather attire, and then stabbed him 7 times in the abdomen. The death of the banker was linked by the San Francisco Chronicle to at least 5 more murders that had taken place in the Folsom milieu. Had they all been perpetrated by the same hand? Can these additional deaths be attributed to the Doodler? Well, this was never ascertained, and more reports of violent and mysterious deaths of gay men kept landing on the desks of Toshi, Sanders, and Guilford. The latter also took on the case of Nick Bauman, also known as Granny Goose, found dead in a basement on May 2, 1975. The cause of death was a fractured skull, but Bauman had suffered additional torture. According to Guilford, the killer had, quote, stomped his scrotum into nothing. Oh my God, that is something that makes me feel uncomfortable. Whew. The cause of death clearly did not align with the Doodler's modus operandi, but, as we'll learn later in today's episode, we cannot totally exclude his involvement. Then in June 1976, the San Francisco Chronicle first covered extensively yet another spate of gruesome killings directed against the drag queens of the Tenderloin district. The aptly named Tenderloin Slasher killed and mutilated 5 confirmed victims in that period. Wow, it's really intense. Is San Francisco like normally so full of murders? I don't really have like a reference point for how bad it would be, or like odds of getting murdered as a gay person versus a regular person in San Francisco. Like, I don't know much about San Francisco. I know it's very expensive to live there. Like, isn't that what San Francisco's most famous for? Like, all those tech companies, people with loads of money making the apartments super expensive. Once again, we'll have to wonder if all these unsolved cases originated from the same pair of hands. We'll likely never learn the truth, so let's focus on the confirmed victims of today's antagonist. I mean, all of these cases, there'll be boxes in some big warehouse somewhere with evidence in them. Can't we just DNA test the trace evidence left at the scene, because it was the 1970s, people didn't clear up after crimes properly, and see if they're all tied together? Wouldn't that be possible? Almost a year had gone by since Klaus Kreisman's body had been found. Then, on May the 12th, 1975, a hiker found the 4th body lying halfway between Vincent and Lower Streets. This location is about 2 miles south of Golden Gate Park, but still relatively close to Ocean Beach. The coroner reported that the death had been caused by stab wounds to the aorta and the heart. Well, the aorta's in the heart. What is with these coroners and like weird ways of stating things? It's like, he got stab wounds in his heart and aorta. And it's like, I'm pretty sure the aorta's like that fat heart valve, right? The really big one. And that his victim had been dragged for about 20 feet after his death. This indicated that the attack had taken place at a secluded area behind some sand dunes, and the estimated time of death pointed to the late evening of May 11th. Both elements suggested that the victim had been attacked during or after a late romantic encounter. As usual, the pockets of the deceased had been emptied, but the police ran his fingerprints and found that he'd served in the military. His name was Frederick Elmer Capin, age 32, a medical corpsman in the US Navy and recipient of a Commendation Medal for, quote, saving 4 men under fire in the Vietnam War. Merely days later, on June the 4th, it was almost a month later to be fair, May the 11th to June the 4th, a hiker discovered the body of the killer's oldest victim thus far, identified as 66-year-old Swedish sailor Harold Gullberg. The grim discovery took place in Lincoln Park, north of Golden Gate. Is that what the band Lincoln Park is named after? Well, there you go. and thus not the usual prowling ground for the murderer. Nonetheless, the area presented plenty of secluded areas for late-night encounters. He had been killed by a slash across the neck, and his trousers had been unzipped, revealing the lack of underwear. The coroner took notice of the maggots infesting poor Harold's bodily tissues, which led him to estimate that he'd been lying dead in Lincoln Park for about 2 weeks. This would place Goldberg's date of death as May 21st, which means that the sailor was killed only 10 days after previous victim, Frederick Capin. Oh, I see. Sorry, I was trying to put together the dates there. So it's May the 11th was when he died, but his body was discovered later, and then on June the 4th, the June the 4th guy was killed early. Like, they're closer together because of the date of discovery being different. The demon was striking with increased frequency. How soon until the next victim? The witnesses. Detective Guilford's commitment to diving deep into the Castro, Mission, Folsom, and Tenderloin scenes, conducting discreet inquiries, eventually paid off. The top cop managed to identify 3 men who had met with or even suffered violence at the hands of the same man, a man who matched the description collected during the investigation on Jay Stevens' death. As a reminder, Stevens had been seen leaving a nightclub in the company of a tall, young, lanky African-American man, and all 3 witnesses provided consistent descriptions, but none of them wished to be identified. They were all closeted homosexuals holding rather visible or important jobs. Thus, there are scant details publicly available from their depositions, such as the exact time in which they met the lanky perpetrator. The first witness was described simply as being a European diplomat. One night, the diplomat was eating at a diner in the Upper Market District sometime in May 1975 when he had been approached by a 6-foot-tall young black man wearing a Navy-type watch cap. The young man asked the diplomat whether he had some cocaine, which is quite an odd conversation starter. Yeah, although maybe he looks like a coke dealer or someone who's on coke. Because you can tell. It's like, oh, this dude's on coke. Look at him, he's on coke. Maybe the guy just looked like he was on coke. While conversing, the man was drawing animal figures on the napkin and told the diplomat that he was a cartoonist. It was this detail which later prompted the press to bestow the nickname the Doodler, although it's not clear whether he had used his drawing skills as a seduction technique with all his victims. In any case, it seems that the diplomat enjoyed the Doodler's company, and the two moved to the former's apartment. It was then that the Doodler attacked his prey, stabbing him 6 times. Luckily, the diplomat survived and was able to provide a description to Guilford. The second witness got away unharmed, running away as soon as he noticed that his companion carried a knife. The second man was described by the police as being an entertainer or actor of national fame. In recent times, journalist Elon Green questioned Randall Alfred, the editor of the Sentinel back in 1975, as to whom this entertainer might have been. Alfred ventured 3 possible names. Was it Johnny Ray? Was it Rock Hudson? Richard Chamberlain? It was a time of very cheap airfare from LA to San Francisco. Wow, it's a fame is like a fleeting thing, isn't it? Because I've never heard of any of those people. Johnny Ray was a singer, songwriter, and actor, a closeted gay man who had previously been arrested for soliciting sex from undercover police officers. Rick Hudson was a Hollywood legend, also closeted, who died of AIDS in 1985. Richard Chamberlain is another acting heavyweight, famous for his role as Father Ralph in The Thornbirds and for being the original Jason Bourne. I have never heard of The Thornbirds, and I had no idea there was an original Jason Bourne movie. There you go. He publicly revealed his homosexuality in 2003. Elon Green contacted Chamberlain's manager to discuss the Doodler case, but received a no comment. Yeah, good. Yeah, as you should. It's like that's private. The third man equally escaped unharmed. Detective Guilford would later declare to the San Francisco Chronicle that he could not reveal any detail about the third man's identity, such as his profession, as that would have made him immediately identifiable. According to the Sentinel, he was, quote, a well-known San Francisco figure who apparently had left the city shortly after his initial testimony. The testimonies collected, in any case, allowed Gifford and his team to produce an identikit of the chief suspects, and I've got a picture of it here, and you will as well, if you're watching this on YouTube. If not, it's an identikit of someone who looks probably like a young black dude. After the doodle of the Doodler was published by the press, in July 1975, the SFPD received a call from an unidentified woman who had recognized the man in the sketch. The woman provided a name, only the first name, and then hung up. 10 days later, she called again, revealing also his address, car license number, and age. None of these details would be disclosed by the police, except an age range between 19 and 25. I mean, that makes sense for the police not to release all of the information, because they don't want the guy to go into hiding. They want to catch him. Guilford was able to track down the suspect and put him under surveillance. A few days later, another woman called his office, identifying herself as the secretary of a psychiatrist. She relayed some interesting news. She had recognized the man in the identikit as a patient of her employer's. 3 days later, the psychiatrist himself called the cops to confirm that, beyond any question, my patient is the murderer. Wait, can they do that? I guess so, because there's the thing, if there's like risk that they'll kill someone, then a doctor can break doctor-patient confidentiality, right? And I guess the secretary isn't bound by doctor-patient confidentiality, so she is free to say. Interesting. According to the doctor, his patient had confessed to the murders during therapy sessions. At this stage, don't confess to murder to your therapist. Like, if you want to get that off your chest, don't. You've murdered someone. You have to live with it. Don't tell your therapist. Don't tell your psychiatrist. Don't tell your priest. Don't tell your lawyer. Unless you've been arrested and then you really need a lawyer. It's okay to tell your lawyer, probably. It's okay. At this stage, Detective Guilford was able to call in the suspect for questioning. The individual, who still remained unnamed, proved cooperative with the investigator, admitting to experimenting with homosexuality. But unsurprisingly, he denied being the Doodler. Speaking to the San Francisco Chronicle in 1977, Guilford revealed more details about the suspect. Quote, "The man is still living in the Bay Area and has a steady lady friend. He says he's reformed. He said he had problems with his sexual identity since he was 13, and he had homosexual experiences and experimented with it. But he said his sessions with a psychiatrist had cured him." And so in 1977, Guilford still had the alleged Doodler under his watch, but no arrest, let alone indictment, had been made. So what was going on? I mean, they don't have any evidence, right? Yeah, they don't have any solid evidence to build their case. All they had were the testimonies of the psychiatrist and the 3 witnesses. But the confession related by the suspect to his doctor could be easily dismantled in court. But how about the diplomat, the entertainer, and the third man? According to Guilford's 1977 interview with the Chronicle, the diplomat was, quote, "angered by the investigation, but tentatively picked up the prime suspect out of a lineup of police photos." But it wasn't enough to go on. So why even do the lineup? What's the point of doing the lineup if it's not enough to go on? No word was made of the entertainer in the article. We can only speculate that he too refused to cooperate further to protect his identity. As per the third man, the Chronicle wrote that, quote, "Here's the key to identifying the killer of 14 homosexuals here 2 years ago," police said. Please note that the Chronicle attributes to the Doodler a higher kill count than the official one. The Chronicle then pressed Guilford for further details about this elusive witness, to which he replied, "I can't say any more. It would be terrible if his name got out." In brief, this third man's account could have helped investigators to solidify their case against the identified suspect, but he too had declined to collaborate further, lest he face a barrage of prejudice and public scrutiny due to his highly visible position. As summarized by the Chronicle, the third man apparently is torn between his desire to keep his sexual proclivities a secret and his desire to bring the killer to justice. Yeah, that's a tough spot. Going cold. It might be a coincidence, but after Guilford briefly detained the chief suspect, the Doodler-style killing stopped altogether. There is nothing more we can allege about the lanky psychiatrist's patient. Perhaps he had nothing to do with the murders, and perhaps the killing stopped as a consequence of increased police action. But I hope you can understand why I mentioned so often the word frustration at the beginning of this episode. Detective Guilford must have felt frustrated too, as he was forced to release a very likely culprit again, allegedly. As the case went cold, the same frustration spread across the LGBT community of San Francisco. In August 1978, newspaper The Crusader raged against the ineffectiveness of the SFPD. To quote them, "Thus the killer continues to walk the streets, drinking his favorite Castro bars, and go to his favorite gay baths, maybe planning on killing even more." According to People magazine, many San Franciscans blamed the botched investigation on the hostile relationship between law enforcement and the gay community. Sure, there was certainly hostility directed against LGBT citizens by several, if not most, of the members of the SFPD, but if I'm allowed my own 2 cents, the broader social prejudice is more to blame, as it prevented the 3 witnesses from collaborating further. As stated by Harvey Milk, quote, "I can understand their position. I respect the pressure society has put on them. They have to stay in the closet." Yeah, it sucks, but also that's the time they lived in, and they got it. That you got to make a decision that's right for you. Now, the case may have gone cold, but it is far from closed. In 2017, SFPD Inspector Dan Cunningham resurrected the Doodler file. Since 2018, Cunningham has provided yearly updates on the case, producing updated composite sketches, i.e. identikit kits of how the initial suspect might have aged. Here is the most recent one. So there we go, picture of what they might potentially look like. Are the ones where they age them actually very accurate? Because whenever they catch people, I'm always like, oh yes, barely. The SFPD also offered a reward to whoever may be able to provide additional information. The reward has increased year over year, and today it's worth $250,000. Goddamn. In 2019, Cunningham announced that his team had collected DNA samples from 2 of the crime scenes, but subsequent updates do not mention if this new evidence actually led anywhere. I also just want to know if they're tied together. Is it the same DNA? In January 2022, the SFPD was able to share some more substantial updates on the Doodler case. A 6th victim was added to the wake of misery left behind by the killer. His name was Warren Andrews, a 52-year-old man who had been found battered and unconscious near Golden Gate Bridge on April the 27th, 1975. Warren had been assaulted with a rock and a tree branch and died several weeks after the attack. At the time, his death had not been linked to the Doodler due to the different modus operandi, but upon reviewing the case, Cunningham reached a different conclusion. Quote, "The location, the time period, the victimology, it all makes me think that it might be connected. The killer likely struggled with Andrews, lost his knife, and grabbed any weapon that he could find from the trail." The San Francisco Chronicle reporters highlighted further similarities to the Doodler murders. It turned out there were enough similarities to link Andrews to the other Doodler victims. He was found at an outdoor gay hookup spot not far from where another Doodler victim was discovered a few weeks later, and his family and friends say they believe he was gay and closeted. The unusual brutality of the attack, what investigators called a rage killing, and the fact that it occurred in an out-of-view spot near water were also hallmarks of other Doodler slayings. So, in Cunningham's thinking, the Doodler preferred a knife as his weapon of choice, but was able to improvise should he lose hold of the blade. You may remember that earlier in the episode I mentioned the death of one Nick Bauman, killed in May 1975 by blunt force trauma to the skull. The poor guy who had his scrotum stomped into nothing. The case was not linked to the Doodler in 1975, but now that Warren Andrews had been added to the list of victims, it's fair to speculate if Bauman too should be counted as the 7th unfortunate victim. As of today, Inspector Cunningham has not given up hope of bringing the Doodler to justice. The suspect initially questioned by Guilford is still considered a person of interest, although his whereabouts are not known. The inspector has hinted at, quote, "new leads from the eastern and southern parts of the US where the Doodler may also have killed." Using a sporting metaphor, the tenacious Cunningham has compared his investigation to an American football game. Quote, "where the ball started out on the 1 or 2 yard line and has been brought out of midfield. Sometimes that's the hardest, getting the last 50 yards, pushing it forward." And here's where we conclude our descent into one of the most baffling, and again, frustrating, unsolved serial murder mysteries in American history. We truly hope that Inspector Cunningham may be able to bring a closure to a tragedy born out of rage, prejudice, and according to some theories, maladjusted sexuality. We may or may not be able to share a definitive name of the Doodler in the future, but what matters to us in the present is to remember the names of the lives lost to his fury. Gerald Kavanaugh, Jay Stevens, Klaus Kreisman, Frederick Kappen, Harold Goldberg, Warren Andrews, and the unconfirmed victims George Gilbert and Nick Bauman. All they wanted to do was live the free, happy life they deserved. To do so, they had traveled to the one city in America which seemed to fulfill that promise, but it instead met the rage of an unforgiving killer. Dismembered appendices. The case of the Doodler bears striking similarities with the novel Cruising, written by Gerald Walker before the events in 1970. The plot deals with a detective going undercover in the New York leather bar scene, seeking to attract the attention of a serial killer targeting gay men. The novel was adapted in 1980 by director William Friedkin of French Connection and The Exorcist fame, with Al Pacino in the lead role. Sounds kind of good. I've never heard of it. Al Pacino's great. Just like in reality, the fictional killer is never apprehended. As I was discussing the case with my mum, herself a true crime buff, she commented, why couldn't the SFPD do the same and pose as gay men to search for the murderer? I explained to her that they did pose as homosexuals, but when they did so, they beat the crap out of innocent gay men. Detective Mum also sought to crack the mystery within a mystery, i.e. the identity of the third man, of which we don't even know the profession. She immediately speculated that he must have ranked somewhat higher in the public perception than a diplomat or an entertainer, and therefore he must have been a politician. That comment led me down a rabbit hole of research, looking for a story of a closeted San Francisco politician who may have left the city in the years following the Doodler murders. Predictably, it led me absolutely nowhere, so thank you, Mum. That even if I found an interesting kernel of information, I would not have disclosed it here, but rather discreetly notified the SFPD. I would also encourage our esteemed audience to do the same. Should you have any information regarding this case, you may send an email, even anonymously, to Inspector Cunningham at daniel.cunningham@sfgov.org. Wow, that's fantastic, just putting his email address out there to take tips and stuff. Legend, Cunningham. that's the end of today's episode. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you, well, not enjoyed it, but I hope you found it interesting. And I'll see you next time.